The last three UFC pay-per-views have been absolutely stacked, from UFC 297 to UFC 300, and now I believe the UFC is starting to deal with some of those bad consequences for those amazing stacked cards. Since if you look at this upcoming card, which is UFC 301 at Brazil, it's a pretty lackluster card, and I don't know what the UFC was doing for stacking all of their key Brazilian fighters at 298 to 300, like Gilbert Burns, Paulo Costa, Alex Pereira, Charles Oliveira, and Gelton Almeida. And I was originally thinking way back that Alex would be main eventing this Brazilian card, since this card isn't that good, and the same thing can be said when it comes to the main event. And look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't mean no disrespect to the flyweight division, but you kind of know it's a bad card when the flyweights are main eventing a pay-per-view. And look, I like the flyweights, and I'm glad they still exist, but this fight specifically between Pantoja versus Steven Erceg shouldn't be main eventing this card. And if you go back and look at the last time the flyweights main evented a pay-per-view, I think it was back at 2020 at UFC 256, and it was Figgy versus Moreno. Now, that was an amazing main event, and we had a series of awesome fights afterwards. That's a flyweight type of fight that should be main eventing a pay-per-view, not Pantoja versus Steven Erceg. And you know the UFC knows it's a bad card when they're asking Alex Pereira to make a short turnaround to fight from UFC 300 to UFC 301, which Alex was originally down for, but he broke his toe, and preferably, I would have not wanted to see him in a short turnaround. Like, I know Alex didn't take any damage in his last previous fight against Jamal Hill, but still, that's a 3-week turnaround. That's a super risky fight. Of course, we know Alex is a thug, but even if Pereira was cleared to fight soon, who would he have faced? Magomed Ankalaev was not doing a short turnaround. The only logical thing would have to give either Anthony Smith or Vitor Petrino a title shot, and neither are deserving to get a title opportunity, but they were both fighting in the card, and they would have been ready. I guess you could have done Alex versus Anthony Smith, but he's coming off a loss, but you could have sold it on the beef between the two. But regardless, I'm just glad that Alex wasn't fighting in this card. And you can tell the UFC was desperate, so desperate to add some star power to this card, that they got Jose Aldo out of retirement, one of the greatest fighters of all time, and honestly, I'm glad to see him make his triumphant return. And in my opinion, he should have never retired when he lost to Merab. I would have argued that that fight aged tremendously well as a performance for Jose Aldo. When you compare what Merab did to his next two opponents afterwards, he freaking bulldozer Peter Yan and Henry Cejudo. Now he's facing Jonathan Martinez on this card, and I don't really mind this matchup. It's going to be a battle of the leg kicks between the two, and I would argue it's going to be a good comeback fight for Jose Aldo's return. It's nothing too dangerous, but personally, I would have preferred Dominic Cruz versus Jose Aldo. It would have been a dream to see, but it just didn't come to be for some reason. What else we got in this main card? Anthony Smith versus Vitor Petrino. Decent fight on paper. No disrespect to Anthony Smith, but he isn't going to be around for much longer. They're using his ranking to move these guys in. Anthony Smith is 2-3 in his last 5 fights, and 2 of those wins were against the same person, being Ryan Spann. And the last 2 fights in this main card is decent at best, nothing too good. I'm looking forward as a fan, of course, but I'm going to be watching for Michel Pereira. He's always fun to watch, especially when he's doing his dynamic striking, so it's going to be interesting how he does in his matchup in the middleweight division against Ewar. And then there's Paul Craig versus Caio Borralho. I think Caio wins. He's on a 15-fight win streak. He's very well rounded, and he kind of reminds me of a middleweight Charles Oliveira, and we all know if Paul Craig can't take you down, he's pretty much screwed overall. So I see Borralho knocking out Craig in the first round. So overall, it's not the worst card ever. There are some decent fights on this main card, but look, I'm still looking forward to it. And hey, let's be real, it's kind of expected since these last few UFC pay-per-view cards have been so stacked. So it was kind of expected eventually for a UFC pay-per-view to fall in quality, and it's okay. It's just this card that's like this. I'm pretty sure 302 and 303 will be way better, not just when it comes to the main card, but the entire pay-per-view in general. So it's just a minor bump in the road, and even though I take the time bashing this pay-per-view, it can still be a great card for all I know. This card could be fun as hell. This could be a card that we're sleeping on. Like, for all we know, this card could have a lot of crazy finishes and banger fights. So regardless, I'm still looking forward to seeing this card. But what do you guys think of UFC 301? Are you guys still gonna watch it or not? And let me know if you enjoyed the video in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed it, please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And like always guys, I'll see you guys on my next one.